women are being exploited by large corporations which offer incentives to freeze their eggs, so says Conservative MP Miriam Cates.
Yes, women do have more than one egg.
Hopefully, yeah.
But the MP for Penistone and Stockbridge and mother of three has highlighted that concerns that women are being falsely reassured by schemes like this, saying, quote, only a tiny percentage of people who freeze their eggs will ever become pregnant.
Well, Miriam Cates joins us now. Miriam, thank you very much for joining us to discuss this important issue. I mean, as a woman myself, I've spoken to friends about this issue, people who perhaps don't have a partner yet or are very busy with their career, thinking about whether they should make this decision to freeze their eggs. And you're sending out a bit of a warning here.
Yes, that's right. So we know from polling that the vast majority of young women do want to become mothers, about 92%, but that increasingly women are delaying having children. The average age of becoming a mother for the first time is getting later and later every year. And of course, there are all sorts of reasons for that, some of which you've just mentioned, finance, career, all those things, not finding the right partner. But what I'm concerned about is that fertility companies and increasingly employers are saying to women, freeze your eggs, that's your insurance policy, don't worry if you're not ready or able to have children right now. If you freeze your eggs, you'll secure your chance of becoming a mother. And unfortunately, it's just not that simple, because the process of freezing eggs doesn't necessarily always work. Around 80 to 90% of them, those eggs are thawed successfully, which sounds like quite a high success rate. But then when you go through all the other steps of fertilization, implanting the embryo, the same steps you would with IVF, very, very few of those eggs end up as a live birth. Even if you do go through the process of thawing your eggs, it looks like only around 19% of those eggs will actually result in you becoming a mother. Now, you wouldn't buy an insurance policy, a car insurance policy, that only had a 19% chance of paying out if you had an accident. And that's what we're looking at. And yet women themselves are spending thousands and thousands of pounds on this, as are employers. And I think women need to have the facts before they go down that route.
But Miriam, that would be an absolutely correct thing to say if women were only freezing one egg. Around a 19% chance of a live birth. But on average, women freeze much more than one egg. I think many places recommend you freeze 15, which raises that chance of success very, very high. If a woman under the age of 35 freezes 15 eggs, she's got an 80% chance of a healthy young live birth. That's a much better success rate than just 20%.
Well, we have to look at the data in sequence here. So firstly, the average age of egg freezing is actually 37, 38, because before then, women don't really see the necessity of doing that. And of course, sadly, the natural decline of the health of those eggs means that eggs frozen at that age are far less likely to be successfly implanted as embryos. But also, yes, you can freeze 15 eggs, let's say, but of course, you only fertilize one or perhaps two at a time. The woman has to be pumped full of hormones, ready to receive that embryo. Then you have to implant the embryo and see if it takes. And don't forget, this is incredibly expensive. The whole treatment from start to finish probably costs £8,000 or so. But each time you want to thaw another egg, fertilize another egg, implant another egg, it costs more money. And sadly, IVF, even in healthy young women using fresh embryos, their own eggs, only has a 20 or 30% chance of success each time. It's much, much lower for frozen eggs, frozen for a period of time and taken from women who are older. Now, that's not to say these treatments aren't important for many, many people. And of course, the research that's going into them is improving their success rate. But it's not fair to tell women who are nearing the end of their fertile life that they have this insurance policy that means that they can absolutely become a mother at any time they want. And then they find out later down the line that they've been sold effectively what is a lie for the vast majority, and that it won't actually result in what they're thinking it will.
Yeah, I think you're right to point this out, Miriam, that regardless of the individual statistics on how many eggs can be fertilised, what are the chances of having live birth, there is this assumption among some young women that whatever happens, whatever decisions they make or whatever comes their way, they will be able to have a child through some kind of scientific intervention, whether it's freezing your egg, IVF, whatever it is. And actually, unfortunately, because of the biological clock, it is difficult, and women have so many decisions to make in their lives, and it's so difficult to know what to do, when to have a child, if you want children, whether you've even got a partner to have one. But they shouldn't be selling a lie. It should come with the warning that this may, unfortunately, not work for you.
Yes, and in fact, the most likely outcome is that it won't work. I mean, that is clear from the data. But I think, there's a much bigger conversation to have here because, of course, there are some significant barriers that stop women having children when they want to and when they're most fertile. We can look at housing prices. That's an obvious thing, not finding a partner, all those things. There's definitely a role for government in that. But there is also a role for education. And I did some polling in September last year and found out that 70% of women think that it's actually okay to wait till 35 to start thinking about having a baby. And of course, sadly, that's just not true biologically. So I do think there's a role for better fertility education to help people just understand what the chances are. And it doesn't help that we have lots of stories of celebrities having babies in their late 40s. It gives this false impression that anyone can do that, which of course is just not true. And the chances are, sadly, that if you haven't had a baby by 30 or 40, you've got a much, much less than evens chance of becoming a mother. So it is about education, but of course it's a much, much wider conversation that we need to be having about the kinds of barriers that there are and how we all, government included, try to break down some of those barriers.
Absolutely. It's an important point, an important discussion to have, particularly as the birth rate continues to decline in this country. Some really stark questions there. But Miriam, while we've got you here, we've got to talk about this speculation over the weekend about plots to remove the Prime Minister, about letters going in to Sir Graham Brady, about this Groundhog Day conversation it seems we've had ever since 2016. But Miriam Cates, have you put in a letter to Sir Graham Brady?
Look, I wouldn't tell you even if I had, because the whole point is it's secret. But I am not going to add to the speculation. I don't recognise the vast majority of the stories that have appeared in the press over the weekend. It seems to me a complete frenzy, particularly from the right-wing press. Look, the party's in a really, really difficult position. The polls are very clear. We know we've got an enormous task. But I would think back to 2 or 3 years ago when, unfortunately, Boris Johnson was toppled. Now, we can all have an argument about whether he was a good Prime Minister or not, but he had a mandate, he won an election, he was elected by the Conservative Party members. And unfortunately, that getting rid of Boris Johnson did set us on a path of this constant questions over leadership. And obviously, every individual Conservative MP has just got to, weigh up what the next move is.
Well, there we go. Thank you very much indeed, Miriam Cates, for joining us. Miriam Cates, MP. Gosh, my words come out. Miriam Cates.
But
it's not that difficult to say, is it?
It is, as Miriam said, different MPs will have different responses to what's going on in the polls right now. And indeed, many people will have that discussion. I know these conversations are happening sort of in the corridors of power, sort of late at night, MPs talking to one another, thinking, gosh, what do we do? Each new relaunch, each new policy, each new budget doesn't seem to be shifting the dial.
Yeah, you can't really be polling at 18% and not be having these conversations. I mean, you've got to be realistic. Is there any way that they can turn around their chances when it comes down to it at the general election?